I'm Nicola Tallant and you're watching Crime World, a podcast about criminals, drugs and the underworld in Ireland and across the globe. Make sure you subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you can be the first to watch all our latest episodes. You can also listen wherever you get your podcasts.
So, Robin, if you were to read Twitter, you'd be led to believe that the armed Gardai are going to get out in the streets and start gunning down teenagers, but it's probably a bit of an over-exaggeration. But we are going to see armed officers on the streets of Dublin after really what has been a major outcry over the summer about lawlessness. I mean, what is the basic plan?
Well, the basic plan is to allocate, I think it was €10 million given by the government for overtime, and use that for all of Dublin, but a lot of it, obviously, the focus has been Dublin City Centre in the last few weeks and months. And a major part of that plan is allocate a public order unit to patrol the city every day of the week. Now, the last 2 or 3 years, during COVID, they were out a lot more. That was scaled back, and you would have seen the National Public Order Unit out maybe on a Friday, Saturday night. That's been changed now. They have them out every day of the week from 3 o'clock in the afternoon till 3 o'clock in the morning, to provide that kind of extra additional visibility and support the uniformed Gardai out there. That's the main part of the plan. And as you mentioned there, the part that really took off on Twitter was the fact that armed Gardai will be in the streets of Dublin. And it's nothing new. You know, the Armed Support Unit have been there since 2016 in response to the Hutch Kinnan feud. They've always been patrolling, and there's this kind of idea that, as you said, you'll have armed Gardai with machine guns standing on the streets, gunning down people, carrying out thefts and robberies. That's simply not the case. They're just a kind of additional presence. And you do have knife crime, you do have serious assaults, and I think it's better for everyone when that does happen, if you can prevent it, that when it does happen, that you have these trained officers who don't just carry guns, they carry tasers as well, that they can get involved and try bring these incidents to a safe conclusion. I
mean, at the moment, like, you have the Armed Response Unit, they tend to sort of, correct my ignorance if I'm wrong, they tend to kind of circulate around, don't they? And they're called in if needed. I mean, and they'd be called in relatively routinely for incidents where they're not necessarily needed. Like, they tend to circulate around the city, and if there's an incident, they'd be called out. Yeah. Instead, now they're going to be maybe visibly on the streets. Is that is the basic difference, isn't it?
Yeah, I suppose they kind of float around certain units for the different Garda divisions in Dublin, but I think the plan with this new announcement is that there'll be more hours allocated to ASUs to be around there. And again, it's going to be more so on cars. They're not going to be walking up Grafton Street with machine pistols hanging off their side.
Yeah, but like, Twitter is a brilliant place, really, isn't it? It brilliant but terrible, or it's X now anyway, I suppose we have to
X,
also say.
Sometimes.
But it becomes this debate about, that we're going to, that the solution to crime is either to get loads and loads of armed Gardai out, or else if we get armed Gardai out, they're going to start gunning down teenagers for robbing a packet of crisps or whatever. It is a more complex phenomenon than that. Like, obviously, now we had a few interviews, one from Drew Harris this week and one from Justin Kelly, and then obviously Angela Willis spoke, another assistant commissioner, at a public meeting. Like, it is funny the way this issue has come to the fore this month, because maybe the statistics don't show that we are rapidly going to hell in a handcart, or whatever the saying is.
Yeah.
Like, and I think the guards have come out and sort of, they've talked about the perception of lawlessness, and sort of maybe subtly tried to suggest it's not as lawless as we think or we perceive. Like, there were some figures to sort of back up what they're saying in terms of the assaults.
Yeah.
Would that be accurate, would you think?
Yeah, well, the figures are the figures, I guess. They're from the CSO. I think they recorded in the first 7 months of this year, the recorded assaults in public places was around 2,353. The same period last year, it was up slightly to around 2,400, slightly over. So they have gone down slightly. What business owners will say is that the figures don't reflect the actual reality of working and being in the city centre, that a lot of time assaults won't be reported. People don't see the point, or just won't report it for various reasons. And the other aspect is that, assaults, even if they have gone down, which will be welcome, it does very little for the people who have actually been assaulted. For the likes of, we spoke about it last time I was on the podcast about Stephen Termini being left in a serious condition hospital. You had another man stabbed on Grafton Street at 9 o'clock on Sunday morning last week. you had another person slashed in the face and other UK tourists being assaulted. So while the figures may show and indicate that it has gone down, business owners would disagree, and certainly it does little comfort the people who actually are the victims, the people behind those figures.
And and that is 100% accurate, of course. And if you do walk through the city, like, you do see a certain amount of it's not just assaults, of course. That's not just the people who, like, we work here, obviously, you know, people live here. It's not solely assaults aren't the only thing to take into consideration. There is a kind of a certain amount of sort of visible antisocial behaviour, and I think that is what some of the business owners are speaking about, I think.
Yeah, if incidents of criminal damage, it's not just people being assaulted. And in fairness to Angela Willis, the Assistant Commissioner for Dublin, she made that point that in terms of perception and feeling, there might be people hanging around who aren't necessarily doing stuff half the time, but there's a feeling that kind of edge towards, which adds to this perception of fear in the city, which Gardai have been talking about, and trying to, I suppose, in their point of view, bring balance to it. Some people might say they're trying to downplay it, but that's their view on what's going on in the city at the moment anyway.
Yeah, because I mean, she kind of, and as you reported, she spoke about it, that the perception of crime is nearly more damaging than the reality of the crime. Like, that is a way that the guards are. You see, it's a funny thing. It's like The Wire. You presumably saw The Wire as a crime reporter, did you?
Several. I'm actually watching it for the 5th time now.
Are you? Right,
yeah,
very good.
Fan.
I'm watching The Sopranos. But there is a bit of The Wire-like thing where it's something big in the media, occurs big in the media, say the assault of Stephen Termini, which is really, really shocking and terrible. It somehow gets to the politicians, who then get a load of grief in the media, and they roll it all down to the police, who then are forced to take a bit of action. And it is funny, like, why this has happened now, and, you know, is it justified? Like,
it's hard to say. And, you know, we had that big meeting at the Gated Theatre this week where I think there's around 200 business owners and representatives meeting with Gardai. And Noel Anderson, he runs the Lemon and Duke pub in the city centre, and he said it was like Groundhog Day, but a bigger version of Groundhog Day.
Yeah. Where
he's had these meetings before for the past 15 years. He says nothing ever really gets done. Concerns are raised. There might be a temporary response to it, and then it goes back to square one. So is it justified? I mean, the grand scheme of things, like, if you have the stuff going on for so long and there's no real solution to it, it probably is justified to a certain extent that it should be highlighted.
Yeah, I think it is justified and the visibility of Gardai has become a key issue, that every single person from the business owners, from the politicians, and from the guards themselves seem to have recognised that's needed, and there is a perception. Like, they are going to put in, I think is it 16,000 extra hours of police time to patrolling. Like, it does again bring up the issue of do they have the money to do these things, the police, and do they have the manpower to do it?
I think they definitely have the money, and, you know, speaking to people, overtime has never been an issue. You know, there's always been funding there for it. It's about getting guards to actually do the overtime. The ones who are doing at the moment can't physically do anymore. You know, you can only do so many hours for your own well-being as well. And then the people who simply won't do it for different reasons, low morale in the job. They just, you know, they want to do their 4 days on, their 4 days off, and leave with that. So I don't think the money, while it helps, and money always helps, you know, throwing money at something, I don't think it's the be all and end all. And you have to actually look at why certain people aren't doing the overtime, why there's resource issues in the first place. And, you know, people describe it, the overtime, the 10 million, the public order unit. Is that just a quick fix? Is it a short-term solution to a long-term problem? And, you know, in 6 weeks' time, are we going to be talking about this again, saying, well, it was nice while it lasted, but now we're back to square one? Yeah,
and I mean, the reality is we're obviously working on Talbot Street, as we said before, sort of, which has really been the epicenter of the focus of some of this, because of the attack on Stephen Termini, and the fact that there's, you know, Talbot Street is one of the more visible areas for this sort of problems. Like, if we get the guards on Talbot Street 24/7, I mean, what happens then? Does it just push it somewhere else?
Yeah, it might stop on Talbot Street, but you just move the problem onto elsewhere. I think that's happened in recent years, where, you know, Gardai might focus on the boardwalk, where there has been serious issues, there continues to be serious issues, and then moves on to Talbot Street. And you put Gardai on Talbot Street, moves somewhere else, you know.
As a young man, Robin, you probably won't remember it, but I mean, it was really this started on O'Connell Street, which, you know, there's still issues there, but largely some of the visible drug dealing, for example, was pushed off O'Connell Street, and it just ended up on Talbot Street.
Yeah.
And so you do see, as I said on Twitter, people saying it's always a law and order solution. Like, is there any other talk of maybe broader interventions? There doesn't seem to be, does there?
No.
Now, that's not to say the guards should be coming up with these, because obviously that's beyond their powers and their resources.
Yeah, the guards have a job to do, obviously, and the people on the ground do as best they can, but the guards can't do everything. And we said it last time, they can't simply be relied upon to fix every single problem. And a lot of these stem from deep societal issues. You have homeless crisis in the city at the moment. You've serious drug problems in part of the city, and the guards can't solve them. But unfortunately for them, they have to deal with the effects of it.
Yeah, I mean, they're dealing with they're not getting to the root causes. Obviously, they're dealing with the consequences. It's funny again, like that. Some senior guards became available to the media this week, I think, as maybe a bit of bad publicity goes on. Not so much to the red tops, but more to the big papers, as somebody used to call it. But there was Assistant Commissioner Justin Kelly spoke this week as well about what's known as the Portuguese model of basically decriminalising sort of possession of drugs. And there's already discussions about this in the longer term about the position we take on drug use in this country.
Yeah.
In Portugal, obviously, they decriminalise possession for personal use, and that people are then dealt with by maybe the health services as opposed to the criminal justice system. Now, he wasn't too complimentary.
No.
I think he said that there was risks, sort of wider societal risks if you have decriminalised drugs, and it would lead to more sort of open drug use on the streets. Is there any word from maybe the guards on the beat how they feel about this? Obviously, there's going to be a range of different opinions.
There's a vast range of different opinions they put there. Some agree with it, some don't. Some see there will be wider issues if you do decriminalise it. Some say that if you do that, the problem just gets worse. Some say you're fighting a losing battle as it is. Others say you're trying to contain the problem at the moment. And in relation to Justin Kelly's comments, whether you agree with them or not, I think it is important that somebody in that position is speaking openly about this. We have a kind of thing in this country where we have our opinions, and people in positions of power have opinions and keep them to themselves. And I think it's important that it might even start a dialogue, and you might agree with them, you might disagree with them, but certainly some of his comments are very interesting as well. I think he pointed out that with the Portuguese model, no other country has adopted it, even though it's highly cited by people who would be pro-decriminalisation. It hasn't been developed in the same extent in other countries. Another point he made was that, if you do legalise drugs, you might have a situation where people, gangs aren't going to stop being involved in illegal activity, and if the government tax drugs, put a bit of extra value on it. If you're used to paying a certain price for drugs, you're going to want to continue paying that price. So gangs will continue to use it as a black market effectively. Now, I'm not, advocating for one way or the other, but they're certainly interesting comments and bring a different perspective into the debate. Yeah,
I mean, personally, I don't know where I even stand on the whole thing. Yeah. It's very hard to, the problem, of course, is people suffer from addiction, and whether drugs are legal or illegal, it's not going to stop that.
Yeah,
that core problem. I mean, we have seen, and then everything becomes so politicized, doesn't it? I don't know if you probably don't watch Fox News or in the US, where they are constantly putting out pictures of people taking drugs in San Francisco.
Yeah, I've seen not on Fox News, but on social media, right? Yeah.
And the reason that is because it's a liberal city who's taken a slightly more liberal approach, and it's like everything in the modern world, this becomes a way to say, the world is collapsing because of liberalism. And you do see a bit of that, I think, in an Irish debate as well, don't you? In terms of, you have maybe some people using the problems of law and order in the city to sort of say this society is collapsing and we need to return to some imaginary values,
Yeah, it goes both ways, I think. People can politicise anything if they want, and it goes two ways. You can use it to say law and order is collapsing. We need more Gardai, we need to be more heavy-handed, or people saying that Gardai might be too heavy-handed, that we need to decrease it. So you can always put a certain spin on stuff if you want to, if it suits your own kind of agenda, and that happens. It happens with Fox News, it can happen anywhere, on social media,
Of course, and people always say that about Irish newspapers as well, but there's no doubt these things are just complicated problems. We also had some talk about the in a sort of another part of the forest, about the dismantling of the Kinnan cartel, which is also another change from the guards, that they do seem to speak about it more. I mean, I remember the days not so long ago where they wouldn't even call the Kinnan cartel the Kinnan cartel. But they have done a series of interviews, I think, about the maybe the not the full demise, but the fact that the control the Kinnan cartel had over the drug trade in Ireland has really, deteriorated. I mean, that would be your own feeling as well on it from your reporting.
Yeah, definitely. They're not the top dog in Ireland anymore by any stretch of imagination. And the operations, the jailings of senior figures has worked in the last few years. But the problem with that is that, and in terms of what they did and the murders they're involved in, hopefully we won't see the likes of that again. But in terms of other criminal gangs being involved in wholesale drug dealing and drug intimidation and violence, others have just taken over now. You know, you have the family organised crime gang in Ballyfermot. You've dozens of other organisations around the country, some who we know of, some who we don't even know of. And once, unfortunately, it just goes full circle. Once they dismantle like the Kinnan cartel, somebody else just takes over. But just hopefully, if they do, they're dealt with quickly and you won't see the level of violence, the level of murder that we would have seen in Dublin a few years ago.
No, I mean, I think the sophistication of the new outfits probably will take a long time for them to reach what had the Kinnans had been. But it is amazing the amount of drug seizures you see these days, I think. Yeah,
in the last few weeks even there's been, 4 million got down in Cork, another 4 or 5 million in Rosslare and 9 million seizures. So
and cocaine floating on the beaches of Donegal.
Yeah, all over the country. Yeah, so it's it just shows the amount of cocaine in the country at the moment as well. And it's all about demand and supply.
It does, and that's the other bit of the whole thing. Like as long as there's a demand, and not just a demand for people that maybe are on the streets and really suffering from addiction, but a lot of the criminality is driven by the demand from people living ordinary lives, if you want, in maybe middle class drug users, etc.
Yeah, they're all part of the wider problem, I suppose. And the interesting thing as well, somebody remarked to me there recently that with these kind of newer gangs, they seem to have gotten the picture that if you sell your drugs, if you go about your business, you're still going to be targeted. But if you don't kill people, essentially, if you're not dropping bodies, Gardai won't go after you with the same intent they went after Kinnans. And I think other gangs have learned that in the last few years, the amount of gun murders related to organised crime has dropped significantly.
Just like in The Wire, Robin?
Just like in The Wire.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, thanks very much, Robin, and we'll probably, no doubt, be back to this again because it's certainly crime in the inner city is not fully gone away.
No, it'll keep on ticking over, unfortunately.
Thanks, Robin.
Thanks, man.